Yeah, so after gallivanting around the world on cruise ships and exploring all the different wine regions, he basically now just spends other people's money and stock sellers for them, obviously in like a concierge consultant type role, and is, really involved with these families. But yeah, it's kind of a dream wine job to get to buy wine that you think is interesting for other people on their dime. So.
You're listening to the Vint Podcast, bringing you expert interviews, alternative market insights, and exclusive access to the world of wine and spirits investing. Enjoy the show.
Our interviewee today on the Vint Podcast is Wayne Baxendale, who is a wine concierge and personal cellar manager. He calls himself the wine Hospitalian. So we have a great conversation with him today. As we are actually now recording this episode before the new year, but we'll be releasing after the new year. So I hope all of our listeners had a great new year, got to drink some good wine with friends and family. I certainly am planning to, and now have, and hopefully have survived the new year festivities with family. It gets less and less. I remember back in early college, late in high school, we used to weigh our skulls on New Year's. That was like a tradition that we had. We would lay our heads down on a scale, like a bathroom scale, and weigh our heads. And obviously, like, you can't
like
weigh
some weird
something.
Rudyard Kipling thing.
It doesn't work. But we had a good time of like all 30 of us at this party, like, ranking each other based on the weight of your skull on the bathroom scale. We've evolved from that, and now we drink champagne and watch the ball drop and go to bed. That's it.
When I was little, we used to go. We had family friends we'd spend every year with, and my mom and dad would always get us the sparkling apple cider, which was great. So I've been popping bottles since I was little.
yeah. I remember actually the very first wine. It might have been the first like alcohol that I ever had. Was some kind of sparkling something on New Year's. I'm sure it wasn't champagne because it was at like my girlfriend at the time's parents' house, and I just know they don't drink champagne. But I remember thinking it was so terrible, this like sparkling wine. And now, sparkling wines are some of my favorite, and I think every wine enthusiast or aficionados would say that sparkling wines and champagne are some of their favorites. So things have come full circle. New Year's have evolved. Wine preferences have evolved. There are, like I said, our guest, Wayne, has a really interesting career in helping families and both higher net worth individuals and just, lay folks like you and I acquire wines for their cellar and their personal collections. I think we'll have a really cool conversation with him to share with you all, diving a little bit more into the a side of the wine business that we haven't touched on, I don't think, yet. And it's kind of this personal consulting side. I mean, we think a lot about merchants and distributors and wine shop owners, but there is also kind of a concierge level side where folks who have maybe larger cellars employ someone to help them keep it stocked and to acquire really cool and interesting things. So Wayne will share a lot, and definitely has me wanting to as aspiring to that. That feels like the upper like the end game if you're in the wine business of where you want to get to.
Yeah. No, something I like about him too is he's the old school, he learned boots on the ground, traveling the world on these cruise ships, and also just tasting a ton of wines. I think a lot of people forget. Now everybody asks you what your qualifications are. I remember when I first passed my sommelier exam when I was still working in advertising, they're like, oh, so you're, we'd be out with friends who actually work in the industry, and they'd be like, oh, you guys are both sommeliers. It's like, well, no, he's actually a sommelier because he serves people wines and does it daily. Yeah. I just passed an exam. But with the phenomenon of, the movie Somm and everything, everybody thinks you need these certifications to be an expert, when back in the day, everybody used to, they were like, what do you mean? Like, just move down to experience years in the industry and tasting a bunch of wine. So it's cool to meet like an old school guy who, he's not old, but, he's done it the traditional way. And he's really, built his client base by pure expertise and knowledge. So it was really interesting to kind of chat with him more about that.
And the network effects and the stories and stuff, basically, I think his approach is just share great wine with people with like a story behind it. And, the kind of the sky's the limit in terms of what you can help people explore when they're open to, just the story and the culture of it all. And I think he has enough experience to be able to bring all of that together for clients.
Nice. So before we get into Wayne, though, do you want to let's share like one or two or maybe three things that you're just looking forward to high level for Vint in 2023?
Yeah, I think, some of the things that we've talked about a lot with our investors is improving our portfolio page and the experience that investors have on the platform when they're viewing their assets and stuff. And we have a lot of changes coming to the platform in the first half of the year that I think will make just our investors' experience on the platform and understanding their portfolios a lot better. I think that's like something I'm excited about for our investors, and then just for us as a team. I think continuing to scale our capabilities as a team, just in terms of hiring new folks, and we mature as a business, we also are able to get more efficient and automate more processes, and that both makes our lives easier, but also allows us to be able to give back some of that time to investors and help make our investors' experience better. And so, obviously, from my side of the business, that's always going to be a win, and those are things I think we'll accomplish in this coming year.
Oh yeah, on the wine side too, efficiency and just additional depth of information. What's been really interesting is now that we've run our number of collections, we've also employed some different forms of technology to really allow us to create some more proprietary views on the wine market and kind of create some of our own perspectives on how to more efficiently buy for our investors to maximize potential outcomes. So it's really exciting. I'm excited to kind of, we've laid a lot of the groundwork at the end of this year, and I'm excited to really deploy that next year. And to your point on the team, I'm always excited, even if I've gotten to speak to people over Slack or, Zoom. We're adding people all the time. So I'm excited to get to meet, everybody who's joined since we last all got together.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That'll be really exciting sometime this winter. And yeah, I mean, there's, to your point, product updates. I mean, for me, it's always kind of a surprise. You're a little more in the loop with those guys, but yeah, it's going to be a big year, 2023.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're thinking more about ways that maybe we can get in front of our investors face to face in 2023. It's been we did a little bit of that last year. It was actually a touch of a challenge. If you remember, this time last year, COVID was spiking a little bit in certain cities still, and so I think 2023 will be the first full year of relative normalcy in terms of how we're able to get out and about with people face to face. And so yeah, we're excited to hopefully visit a few of you in some of the big cities around the country this year, and it'd be cool to get some of the Vint community together.
Nice. Well, I think being able to host people for events and hospitality is a good segue into our interview with Wayne Baxendale. So here he is. Enjoy.
Hi, Wayne. Thanks for joining us today. Glad to have you on.
Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think this is a really special opportunity for our listeners just to get to hear someone from the wine industry, from a sector of the wine industry that we don't really talk too often about. And that's maybe this like kind of boutique wine concierge, like private somm sort of role. Do you want to describe a little bit for our guests or our listeners what you do day to day?
So day to day, I have a number of clients. I offer basically what is a boutique private seller management service. So what we do is we offer discreet deliveries to the door. With some of the clients that we do have, they prefer that type of delivery. So it's just a case of keeping it discreet, keeping it personal, but on the same time, having a seller management tends to kind of flow in a few different ways. But what we like to try and do is offer literally boutique wines that probably they've never heard of before. Therefore, we offer private tastings for our clients. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, it's private tastings where we can build a massive rapport with our customers. And one of the things that I pride myself in is, being the wine hospitalian that I've coined, is just offering that really unique private management company, but at the same time having the hospitality, which people, I think, it tends to have gotten lost in our industry. And one of the things I like to do is just bring that to the forefront of the customers who we have on our profile.
When
Yeah,
you
that
say
makes
that sorry, Billy, when you say that
no.
hospitality is lost, do you mean that in the sense of like direct to consumer wine retail? Because obviously, we have high end restaurants in the hospitality there. Or can you describe what you mean by hospitality is lost?
So I would say I would probably say over the past 10 years within the wine industry, especially on the forefront of fine dining or, Michelin star restaurants or anything, around that caliber, it tends to be a lot about the food and a lot about, a finely curated wine list. But I sometimes feel that when you go to some of these places that the hospitality is lost. And I know we've spoke, Brad, previously about a gentleman called Bobby Stuckey, who, absolutely dominates the industry. And what I wanted to do was to try and have that feel where you can have that bespoke approach to wine and really good hospitality. And I think hospitality can go in a couple of different directions, whether it is fine dining, which everybody loves. Don't get me wrong, I love it as well. But it's that nice, homely feeling where you walk into a restaurant and it's not, yes, sir, no, sir, please, ma'am, no, ma'am. It's having that warming feeling, which I think has kind of lost its way a little bit. And this is just my personal opinion. But to bring that back and to make people feel like, they're walking into your house, basically. It's a chat amongst friends rather than a paying client. And I think that is kind of lost a little bit. And it's something that I do quite well. And, I think hopefully most of my customers will feel the same way, is it's having that very nice mutual connection that doesn't feel too orchestrated, which I feel fine dining and, Michelin star restaurants kind of are. But there's some people who are doing it really, really well.
Right. So I'm happy you guys talked about Bobby Stuckey. I mean, Brady, one of Brady's favorites, but he's a great example of really high quality wine experience, but like teaching people about different regions, like Friuli with his passion. And like, I love that type of thing as well. But speaking of kind of different regions, can you tell us a little bit about your background, about how you got to travel so much and kind of develop these hospitality chops? And as short as you can.
It's a long conversation, but I'll keep it as short as I can. So I've had the pleasure of traveling the world probably in its entirety, from start to finish, probably about 4 times. Wow. I worked on cruise ships, so there's not many places I haven't been in terms of, specific wine regions, but if you think of Georgia, which is, the home of wine, if you will, in the Black Sea, throughout all of Europe, to Iceland, all the way over. I've actually been to all the Fijian Islands, over to New Zealand, Australia. So I've had the pleasure of being in these locations and drinking wine in their birthplace. And I always coin the phrase, I'll probably say this a few times, where there's no better experience than tasting wine in the place that it was actually born in. And I think a lot of people will probably agree with me, where if you go to, for argument's sake, Bordeaux and go to a chateau in Bordeaux and have that experience, then that is something you just can't replicate in a restaurant. So it's nice to have the privilege of, being in Bordeaux and tasting wines in Bordeaux, tasting a Geelong Pinot in Geelong, having a Yarra Valley Shiraz, or, I could go on, but, having a Rioja in Rioja, or so on and so forth, So I've had the pleasure of doing that. And one of the things that we did when we traveled a lot was we always made the attempt of eating as local as we possibly could and drinking as local as we possibly could. That does include wine, obviously, but that goes for, local beers, local spirits. So there aren't many places that I haven't touched where I wouldn't say, oh, I've been there and, not have the experience of it. So I have that really rounded experience of being in Bordeaux, being in Italy, being in Spain, being in Portugal, and just having the pleasure of tasting wines from these regions. And all I want to do is just share that, love and passion of travel with wine and just bring it to the people who basically want to ask about it.
But California has emerged for you, right? As kind of a favorite destination, which I like because, I kind of tout, for us here in the States, like we should embrace more so Napa and Sonoma and obviously
course,
Oregon
yeah.
and Washington State. Instead of we've moved beyond that. Now I drink Burgundy. I think that there should be a little bit more regional pride. So what made it such that in your travels you've kind of settled on with your clients, like, preferring Napa?
So when I had the pleasure of traveling to go and work on cruise ships, as I say, I was offered an opportunity to then move to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Along the travels, I met some very good friends of mine, Andrew and Maeve Smith, and they now work in and were born in, Maeve was actually born in just south of San Francisco, a place called Half Moon Bay, and pretty much sure everybody's familiar with it. So we traveled a lot out there to go and visit our friends. So having the love of wine and them living in California, it was like, no brainer, let's go, let's get out there. So every waking moment of, a vacation that we had was spent in California. Now, when I was living in Florida, they came over to see me. I went over there. And then obviously, one of the things you've got to do in Napa is go and visit Napa, because they live in Sonoma now. So we made an attempt of every time we were there, it was like, right, how many wineries are we going to? What can we squeeze in, whether it's traveling over the Mayacamas mountain range into Napa, or just traveling up the valleys and seeing what we could do. So I really fell in love with California as a region, because it's very much like England calling home. It has its seasons, Florida doesn't. It's hot as hell all the time. So we really enjoyed our time in California, and I probably just fell in love with it being similar to home, but living, a true American lifestyle, which we did for 10 years because we lived in Florida. So one of the things that I did with my time when we were in Florida was I donated my time to a place called Wine Watch. We'll elaborate more on it as we go into the cast. But one of the things that they had was a 30,000 bottle cellar, which, we took full care of. And a lot of the things that they did in Florida was drank a lot of California wine. So we really did drive, having friends in Napa and working in a wine shop that, had a lot of focus on Napa, although all over the world. But that's probably where it really drove home for me that I just fell in love with it and just fell in love with California wine.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, to your point, being able to go see it, I definitely gained a deeper appreciation for both Napa and Sonoma. Once I moved to California, I was able to go up there. But it's kind of interesting. Yeah, Brady is our Napa and California stand. I'm in California, but I feel like I'm the European stand, which is kind of funny. So I look the other way. But along those different learnings, how do you try to incorporate one, like the sense of being somewhere, to your experiences with your clients, and then how has the hospitality that you've seen in different parts of the world, have you taken little pieces of hospitality that you try to incorporate back home now?
Absolutely. So one of the things I do talk about a lot of my clients is my travels. And, when you've been to, let's say, Venice at 8 o'clock at night, it's a completely different space than it is at, 10 o'clock in the morning when it's, the hustle and bustle of the tourism. But when you do find those and those little pockets of little places like, Portofino, Amalfi, Sorrento, Rome, Florence, that's just Italy. We've not even touched anywhere or any other country. But when you find those little things that make a difference, and the hospitality in these countries that I've experienced are just so warming. They're not like your typical touristy spots, which is one of the reasons I probably fell in, whether it's my English accent being in California or not, is I found it very warming. So one of the things that I always talk about is how warming a country is and what the hospitality is like. And when I do a wine tasting, and for argument's sake, we've got a Spanish region, is you talk about how the Spanish do it compared to how the French do it, the two different styles of culinary cooking, completely different lifestyles. The Spanish always have a siesta. Why don't we? Why doesn't France? Why doesn't Portugal? So it's nice to combine all the experiences that I've had and the wine that I tasted in that country, and talk about that with my clients and say, I remember when. And it's always a case of I remember when. And one of the things I think is very prominent when it comes down to hospitality is someone will always remember a time in their life when they had that really, really good bottle of wine. They'll always say, remember when we had that really nice bottle of wine at such a restaurant, or we remember that bottle of wine we had at such a place. That will always come back to people's memory. And if you can replicate that there and then for that customer, that's really good hospitality. And that's just something that I just want to share with everybody.
So are there...
I hope that answers the question.
No, that was really good. No, yeah. So on that point, as you're starting, I guess, aside from hospitality alone, let's dive into the wines a little bit. Are there certain regions or certain styles that your clients are looking for? Are they all on the very high end? Are you mixing up the calibers?
So I with the cellar management service that we offer, we do get a lot of variation. I'll probably say from the top to the bottom. I had a client the other day who shouts me up at the last minute and says they want 24 bottles of Cristal, and then they text me 10 minutes later saying, can I add 12 bottles of Runart on it? And then they say, oh, have you got something different? So I'm fortunate to have people all over the place and all over the world because I have my own importation license, so it does make it a little easier for me to get wine into the country. But I think networking as a whole, which I've really put my foot into, is to have that connection with different distributors who specialize in different wines. So if they turn around and say, oh, what champagnes have you got? I'm going to say, well, instead of having, some of the big names that we have, why don't you try a grower's champagne, for argument's sake? Now, for those people who don't know what a grower's champagne is, it's basically a small producer who no longer sells their grapes to the bigger producers and decides to put their own label on the stuff. There's so many people out there who are making really good sparkling wines, champagne, let's call, who just don't really get the day of light. So I like to bring those people to the forefront and say, hey, you've got these big names, we've just reeled them off, but why don't you try something new? And then that's where the private tastings, the hospitality comes into it, where you can push these really small producers who are doing really good jobs and just giving them a different experience. And that, at the end of the day, it's about a sense of curiosity and a sense of exploration, which I like to push onto the clients, and it is received really well. So it can vary from high end down to the people who say, Wayne, the wife loves, Prosecco. Can you get me 12 bottles of that? Sure, not a problem. And then that gets delivered to the door. So it is about keeping up with the Joneses, as we say in England. But if your hospitality is good and, you're providing something that is bespoke, you do get so many different people within that range.
Is it most often that you get recommended or you get asked to, like you described, can I have this producer or something, from this region? Or do you also get, hey, cellar's getting low, or I want to start my cellar, here's $10,000, $15,000, go and,
yes,
give me the most bang for my buck. Like, get me as many bottles as you can. That's reasonable in that price.
Yeah. So the first one I had one of my clients who basically turned around and said, we've just moved into a brand new house. They've got an unbelievable wine fridge. They have an upstairs bar and a cinema, and they wanted to fill that. And they basically turned around and said, I've got X amount of money. I want some of this, I want some of that, and fill it with whatever you think. So I don't go with the usual. And in England, Malbec seems to be a big thing at the moment, as well as, the Riojas and New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, for argument's sake, is another big one. But I like to say, so here's what I've done for you. I've gone through, for argument's sake, Croatia, Macedonia. So we've, the unsung wine regions of Europe that have been making wine a lot longer than we have, and a lot longer than we've been around. So I like to put those type of guys forward and say, why don't you try that instead of having your Argentinian Malbec? These guys are doing a really nice Malbec. Now, you could argue the sake that in England, Argentinian Malbec is very famous over here, or is very popular per se, but nobody's never really heard of Cahors Malbec. Now, Cahors Malbec, as we know, is the founder of Malbec, and still is in Bordeaux. They still use it in Bordeaux. Not a lot of people know that because they don't understand what goes into the bottle. So for me, it's about going into a little bit more about what's in the bottle, why is it in the bottle, what's in a bottle of Bordeaux. You've got the 5 grape varieties predominantly, and just really turning up the heat on it and just going into a little bit more detail where the customer really does appreciate it.
Do you have any clients who are purposely purchasing just for investment purposes, or maybe they're getting 2 cases and always putting one aside with the intention to resell?
So I'm a strong believer of, when it comes down to, I've always been asked, what's a good bottle to put down? And you can argue that there's many of them that you can do. So instead of just either saying, oh, well, if you want to make an investment, and if you've got that type of money to make that investment, why don't you buy 2 bottles, drink one and put one down? Now, a lot of them say, well, why would I do that? Why not? So yeah, we do get a lot of people who do say, what can I put down for the next 15 years? Or, what can I put down for 30 years? Or better said, what can I buy a case of that I just don't have to think about and just leave alone for the next 30 years? So we do get a lot of those questions, but I think it's a case of you have to introduce it before you can say, oh, why don't you just buy that? Again, the hospitality side comes into it is, you can buy a bottle of Tigonello. Well, why don't we drink it together? And you can make that decision and maybe try that route. And I feel that way works for me, and it works really well with my clients as well.
You have to keep in mind when you're purchasing for a seller, maybe there is a wine that needs 5 years to really round out. Like maybe you're getting I don't know, Barolo on release, and you need at least 5 years for it to, become, at least start showing anything that it should be. Do you give them something that's in between? I could also think of a Montalcino Rosso instead of just as you give them a Brunello from the same producer. Do you kind of stagger things like that to give drinking windows?
Yeah. I mean, I've not had the opportunity to do that as of yet, but it's definitely something I would consider. You could go for a traditional, Barolo, rather than the new method, so to speak. And the 2 different approaches, 2 different uses of oak, and and that again, you could go back to the hospitality side. Is you could put both of those 2 different, same region made in 2 different, completely separate ways, and let them make that decision and say, well, this one's more approachable in 5 years. This one you won't be able to touch for the next 15 years. So it depends if they're looking for, that, really big initial, don't want to touch it for 30 years, or something that, if they're going to buy a case of, then they can open a bottle and not feel too worried about it, and they know it's going to be tasting absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, always buy 2 bottles just in case the first one tastes really good. It's same with books. You buy 1 to read and 1 to give away.
Exactly.
That's been my philosophy too. So how many? I mean, I don't want to linger too much on the specifics of individual clients, but I'm imagining that most of the folks you work with have 2,000 bottle, 3,000 bottle sellers, or is it actually more often that it's someone like me who has 150 bottle fridge sort of thing?
I think that the biggest one I've had was probably about 600 bottles.
Okay.
So nothing huge, but I would say the seller's quite specific, rather than that being just stuff that was bought for them and they just put it down. But nothing major at the moment. But we'll wait and see.
Well, I was trying to lead into what is if you were talking to someone and say, hey Wayne, I just bought a wine fridge. It's 35 bottles, 50 bottles, something like that, and I want to stock some stuff so that when I have friends over, I can drink and have a good time and pair around and have a lot of options. What would be what's kind of your starting point? What would be maybe a 3-pointed framework for how you would think about someone with a small fridge, how they would get started?
Well, I've had the pleasure of running a wine bar, which is where some of my clients came from. So I'm fortunate enough to already know their palate. So I had one the other day, and it was Wayne, I've got a Christmas party coming up, so I want to treat the staff, but I want to get X, Y, and Z. But then I also said, well, now you've just got your new wine fridge, which he just has. Why don't we stock that up? So it was like, oh yeah, all right then, okay. So on the back of that was some Pellini Montrachet, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. But then you can, if you already know the palate, then it's easier to go down. Well, if you're looking for something a little bit more, with a little bit more oomph, then go for. Do you want a warm site Montrachet or a cold site Montrachet? Do you want a Batard Montrachet? And that's when you can really start turning up the noise on terms of that. But it also gives you the opportunity to sit down with them. Again, coming back to the hospitality side, is here is a bottle of Batard Montrachet. Let you do the talking and see if you like that or not. And then, that specific client only likes specific whites. They don't really like anything else. So yeah, it's I would probably say it's understanding your customer's palate, and if you have a price, if they give you a price in mind, that does make it a lot easier. But if you know the first one, which is understanding your client's needs and your client's palate and what they like, it does make it a lot easier. But for someone who's really starting out with something like that, is just do that private tasting. If you wanted to start out in cellar management, maybe do that and understand if you can get a bit of background, whether it's, white Burgundies, whether it's, a white from Rioja, or is it something from California, you're not going to know until you really understand what the customer or your client needs. But that gives you the best opportunity to really have that really good hospitality and open up the book for them and just teach them something new. Again, going back to the space of exploration and, the sense of curiosity. That for me is what I'm good at, and that's where I've always started with it, is understand what they need rather than what you like. And as
so you're not thinking
push that a lot.
You're not thinking 20% sparkling, 40% red, 40% white. That's how every set. Yeah,
no,
okay. Right.
It's that. So you could, but if you turn around and say, like for argument's that the last client had just dropped off, they only like white, so why would I give them red?
Sure,
and if they love rosé, so I got them 24 bottles of rosé.
Yeah.
So it's just a case of really understanding what they need rather than what you would like to push or have a set. I mean, you could by all means, but if you really want that personalized, portfolio or personalized approach, I would go with that.
Looks like Billy's microphone's off.
Yeah, he just went dead.
Yeah, my bad. That's a little touch thing. Technology. On the personalization side of things, you worked or have experience with both fine dining and the wine bar scene. Correct. I've always been kind of a firm believer that my local wine bar actually knows what I like more than a supposed fine dining thing that, even if I've never been to this stage, but they have me on like a reservation and they have like that little like list of things that he likes when he comes in. But I feel like a som at a fine dining place doesn't know you nearly as well as somebody who, you see a few times a month when you come in and just ask for whatever you want. What are your perspectives there? So
without shaking the tree too much, I've worked in, the neighborhood, your local neighborhood wine bar. And I do feel that you have a much more easier and, again, we'll go back to the hospitality. It's a lot easier when you have that person who just comes in for that one glass of wine a week. I think you have a much more personal connection with those people because you've actually spent more time with them. And that I feel is much stronger as a business model and in the wine world where that is, I think, coming back to you're walking in, the person knows the name, the favorite glass of wine's already hit the table before your bums touch the seat. That is good hospitality. I don't think that is achievable in fine dining or a Michelin star restaurant because it tends to be more about the food and the experience rather than about the wine.
Right.
Now, again, without shaking the tree too much, I've worked in both, and what I found that Michelin star restaurants tend to stick to a profit margin. Obviously, everybody's in the business to make money. We know that, but it's how you approach it, I think, which makes it a little bit more personal. Now, with fine dining and Michelin star restaurants, as soon as you sat at the table, you pretty much sat there. You can't really move, and you've got quite a restricted wine list. And you buy the glass is probably going to be quite limited. Out of experience, I know this to be true. Whereas you go to your neighborhood wine, your neighborhood wine bar, and you might have your favorite song might have something under the cellar which just came in, and it might be a Traldo grape from Trento, which you've never heard of before. So let's give that a go. And that's where the good hospitality comes into it, where they're willing to open a bottle, give you a glass to say, what do you think, rather than what the company thinks or what they think pairs well with the food. That is very, very personal. I think that your palate is your palate. It shouldn't be predicted by, maybe, let's say, 10 by the glass, or, whether that's white or reds. So they're quite limited and quite limiting to the people who come through the door. Whereas your neighborhood wine bar knows exactly what you like, and they're willing to just go that extra mile with you. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually how I had my first Traldo back in the day. As a person was just like, "Oh, hey, I think you would like this." My local,
exactly, and it's going back to the sense of exploration and curiosity.
Yeah, the local wine bar I have specifically in mind, they have 30 or 40 wines by the glass, but they don't actually have a menu. You just tell them kind of what you're feeling that day. So after you go enough times, the guy already gets a sense of, even if I say, like a lean kind of funky white, he knows what I mean by funky white. I don't have to go into like further explanation. So it is kind of fun once you build that rapport, what you can find.
Absolutely.
I want to do a little bit of a game, or put you on the spot a bit, Wayne, with an exercise. Maybe Billy can jump in with a few of these too. And asking you, I'm going to give you kind of a general designation for maybe a country or a region in the world. And then I want you to provide either a variety that you get really excited about, either drinking yourself or bringing in for a client, if I'm the client, or even if you want to get granular, name producers that really excite you. So if I said champagne, you might say this grower, champagne producer. Maybe it would be cool to do like maybe a more expensive offering, like something really high end, and then something more like value based. Could be a fun exercise for our listeners to get some new ideas about what wines to try in different regions. Let's start with let's hear about Italy, because you were on Italy a little bit. Can you give us what excites you?
Narrow it down a little bit, Brady. Give him like north or south. Or
sure. Let's do north. In Piemonte, we had a Piemonte collection in our offering batch.
We could spread that out to Lombardy as well, if you want to get a little bit more out there. We won't go all the way further west.
Yeah, you could do. I see. One of the things that I always push on is, if you're going to go through, like, for argument's sake, if you wanted to do northern Italy, have you had anything from, outside of Veneto, like Venice area? Try something that's over there. Now, I'm a strong believer on, because I've had different varieties from all over the world, I'm a firm believer on not just drinking. So for argument's sake, Barolo is obviously famous for Nebbiolo, but there's so many different things that you can have from these different regions, whether it's a white or a red. So one of the things that I would say is, if you have a region that's really famous for Nebbiolo, Barolo, is try and argue the case is there's something different that you can have from there, whether it's Corvine or, that's one of them, like Agave, which is very popular in the Piedmont areas. So maybe instead of understanding a region that is famous for, is try something that is not famous for. That would be my first argument on that one.
No, that makes a lot of sense. He brings that up. We had a collection. I was just over there, and I had my buddies trying like Herbaluce. We ended up getting a Valtellina on our way back to Milan, which is like, you guys tried Barolo. Now here's a Nebbiolo from somewhere else. But I'm right with you on that. But to Brady's other point, let's go like more out there. I saw you just wrote something. Was it on Serbian wines or was it Croatian? It was Croatian wines.
Croatian wines, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, we had a Serbian wine this weekend. It was on my mind. What are some regions kind of like? Well, what like Croatia, and then what are some grapes like? Let's start with Croatia, and then maybe some that are similar, where you're like, this variety or style is really interesting.
So Croatia is, I don't know, for those who don't know where it is, it's just off the central coast of Italy, literally across the water. So if you think of, central Italy being, it is quite a warmer climate. It does have its cooler spots. So for those who don't know, Zinfandel is very famous from Croatia and is the birthplace of the Zinfandel grape. So there are a lot of grape varieties that do paddle on the back of that, but have their own, unique taste to them. For argument's sake, Havar Hills, Pavlak Mali, is grown on the hillside, very similar to what the Rhone Valley looks like. And because it's so close to the ocean, it does have that freshness going on, that salinity that you do get from the coastal areas. But it is a red wine, so it's very deep in its color. It's got a lot of whack to it, but it's just completely different to what you would normally find if, for argument's sake, say Italy. And Croatian wines, I don't think have had the limelight just yet. I do think it is a thing that is up and coming, whether it's red or white. Posip is another one that comes from there. It is very much more like a Pinot Noir, or like a Blaufränkisch. You probably saw on my Instagram or otherwise. Blaufränkisch is another thing that's up and coming. But those are the regions and the grapes varieties that people don't really necessarily go to in the supermarket, or unless told, they wouldn't necessarily buy. So I think that Croatian wines are definitely up and coming, especially in the UK, but something that just needs to be explored by pretty much everybody who enjoys wine. Just
because I'm a Blaufränkisch fan, I think I probably spent the first quarter of our podcast episodes talking about Blaufränkisch at some point. Who are some of your favorite producers? We'll stick to Austria for this one, the homeland.
I wouldn't say necessarily. I'm a big fan of. I wouldn't say with regions, not necessarily producers. Mm-hmm. In Austria, there's not. I don't really drink a lot of Austrian Blaufränkisch, to be completely honest. Now, I had one the other day from the Finger Lakes. The other Blaufränkisch I had was from Testament, and I think that was Croatian Blaufränkisch. Don't necessarily drink a lot of Austrian stuff. I'm ashamed to say that I should drink more, but no, not really had a lot from there, to be completely honest.
Well, I mean, to your point though, something I think that will be allowing Central European and Eastern European grape wines to kind of reassert themselves, because historically they've been very prominent, is people understanding what the grapes kind of are. Each country has like its own name for these grapes. I think I was just in Slovenia, and it's just like trying to understand what ferment was called there based on what's called in like Hungary versus like what a certain grape is called, like Rebola Jala, for example, Rebola Jala. It's like all of these names. I think everybody's starting to be a lot more open-minded. I'd love to get your opinion on like the open-mindedness of the wine drinker now to the stories behind the wines, rather than getting caught up on the varieties themselves.
Absolutely. Good question, because one of the things I always bang on about, and especially for the English folk, I don't know necessarily what the trends are over in your neck of the woods, but when you start speaking of Bordeaux, people always turn around and go, oh, I had a really nice Bordeaux, or I had a really nice Chianti, or I've had a couple of people who turn around and say, oh, do you know what, I don't really like Chardonnay, but I love Champagne. So for me, I think it's, especially when it comes down to the European style of the wine label, and I've got into many an argument with it, is a lot of them are so focused about producer and region rather than what's actually in the bottle. Now, it could say Bordeaux Superior, or, for argument's sake, Margaux. Now, if somebody picked up that who doesn't know what Margaux is as a region or what goes into the bottle, how do they know what goes into it? So it is a little bit, you have to know about wine to understand what you're buying, or you have to know a little bit more about, what goes into a bottle of Margaux. And I think that scares a lot of people because they don't necessarily know what goes into a bottle of Medoc versus to what goes in a bottle of, Pemarol.
Mm-hmm.
So being to left bank, right bank, even that, when I first started out, I was like, what's left bank? What's right bank? It's Bordeaux. What's the difference? And then when you start going into regions, sub-regions, Pauillac, Margaux, Margaux for me is one of my favorite regions in France. Now, when someone says, what's your favorite wine? I don't necessarily have a favorite wine. I have a favorite region because of what grows in that region, not necessarily the producers, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when it comes down to, going that extra mile and trying to understand a little bit more is rather than shop at, your high street supermarkets, Publix or Safeway or whatever it is, there are other people you can go and shop at. But if you go into your local wine shop, you're going to understand a lot more about what's in the bottle. And, you'll probably start to understand the way it works rather than, seeing a promotion in a magazine, for argument's sake. Excuse me. So for me, I definitely think it is, if the more people understand different wine regions and start asking a little bit more, or have the producers put what's on the bottle, what's on, on the label, what's in the bottle, I think there might be a little bit more of a turning point where people go, well, I've never had or understood what's in the bottle of Bordeaux, but I love Cabernet Sauvignon or I love Merlot. So if you love Merlot, you're definitely going to go for a right bank rather than a left bank. So I think if consumers understood that a little bit more and the producers were a little bit more forgiving in Europe, then they would probably sell a little bit more. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's worth talking about.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think it's from the Europeans has a more, obviously, centuries more wine history and a developed kind of understanding of wine because the U.S. really wine culture grew up with that variety on the label. It started back in the day where they would call some wines in California Chablis or Velvet Burgundy, but all my friends have the exact opposite problem. Like people I'm trying to get into wine, they're like, if it says Chardonnay or something on the label, they're like, oh, I know what this grape tastes like because they think it tastes the same everywhere. But if you put Croatia on there, they'd be like, oh, cool, I've been to Croatia once. Like, let me try it. So it's kind of like
So the argument that you can always say is the Italian version of it says Puglia and it's a Primitivo versus Clinker Brick Old Vines Inn.
Right.
So the two completely. Well, I've never had a Primitivo before, so I'm going to go for the Clinker Brick Old Vines Inn.
I don't like Zin. let me try this Primitivo, and then they like it.
Exactly. I don't like Chardonnay, but I love Champagne. So when you start really turning up the music of what's really in the bottle and giving that to the consumer, I think that's where, again, I'll go back to it. That's where the hospitality side comes into it. But you're making the consumer, the customer, your client, the people who stood in front of you, understand that a little bit more. And I think that's a little bit more warming because when I first started in the world of wine, I never knew what Primitivo was, and I never knew what was in a bottle of Bordeaux until I actually did the research to understand what was in it. Not many people go through the lens that you and I go through, so they wouldn't necessarily understand that. So I think there's a lot of things that could be done that aren't done for traditional reasons. But I definitely think it is very much a European thing, and you guys across the pond who do it, ever so differently, as well as they do in Mexico. They're really pushing the boundaries over there as well.
I wanted to spend a little time, Billy, getting into some of the side conversations that we have on the pod often about the emergence of English sparkling and what's going on kind of on the coast in the southeast up there in the UK. Tell me a little bit about your perspective on English sparkling and its emergence kind of. Hold on. Let me say that I haven't been anywhere where I could find English sparkling on the shelf here on the East Coast in a store.
Or at least in Baltimore. I would say it's probably easily.
So I couldn't find it in Baltimore. I couldn't find it in Richmond. Couldn't find it in the South at all. I probably don't go far enough north, but Gus Bourne, and that's I don't know what else is distributed.
So I was gonna argue the case. Neil will love me for this, but Gus Bourne for me is I had the pleasure of actually attending the Harvest Dinner, which was absolutely phenomenal. But they're probably one of the biggest ones at the moment that are producing a lot of let's not forget, they're a great producer, and I love their wines. They're very expressive. But a lot of people don't understand that. We've been growing grapes for such a long time. I know one producer who I served, and he's been producing wine for 25 years. So we do have a bit of, not as big as, California or for Europe as a whole, but we have a little bit of history. But it tends to be more of the unspoken of varietals. Rissensteins are one of the big ones. Obviously, we're producing Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. But Gusborne is a really good producer. Hattingley Valley Wine Estate, they're producing some phenomenal stuff. A lot of them are doing cuvées. But now we've had really good heat over the past couple of years, so our Pinot Noir's really becoming into its own little characters, and it's showing really well. The 2022 vintage was phenomenal for us, high yields, very high quality, but there's so many small producers who are just been making wine for the past, I don't know, argument's sake, let's say 12 years. A lot of them started 2010, 2012, when it started to become quite popular, unheard of. It was very under the market. But now they've, gotten, 4 or 5 vintages into the bag, and they've really started to hone in on what is a very expressive style of, Chardonnay and so on and so forth. So I think for English wine moving forward is going to be very, very popular. I think it will become apparent, hopefully in the next 5 years. You guys will see a lot more of it. But there's a lot of producers: Night Timber, Hattingley, Simpson, Davenport, who he's been making wine for 20 plus years, and he's been doing it in a small little shed, and a lot of them are. One of my favorites is I don't know if you've heard of this. You may have heard of it. It's a very popular grape in England called Bacchus. Now, Bacchus named after the gods, obviously. A very small producer called Hidden Springs. Now, those guys have a very small patch of land. I've been there a couple of times. And all they do is Bacchus and a Bacchus Fumé, and they do a Chardonnay. Now, I was there maybe 4 months ago, and I have one reserve, 2018 Bacchus. You can't buy it. You cannot buy it. I've got one bottle left, and for the love of me, I don't want to open it, but I do because it's delicious. But there's a bunch of really small guys doing really good jobs over here, and it'll be probably 2 or 3 years. I think it'll be a lot more popular. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
So I've never actually heard of Bacchus. So I just looked it up. So it's bred from a Sylvaner Riesling cross and Muller Thurgau. It's an interesting combo. What does it taste like?
Think of fresh bright green apples. Gooseberry is a lot of the ones that are coining the phrase over here in England. So it's a very gooseberry, fresh lemon cut grass, bright green apples, almost like a Granny Smith, if you will. It's very, very bright, very acidic, very high. It's absolutely delicious. I'll have to send you a bowl.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. Yeah, well, send us that one. Yeah, you don't have to drink it now. You don't have to make the decision. We'll just drink it for you.
Don't worry, I'll put a bottle aside for you.
Awesome.
Do you do any like wine tourism? Sort of like take folks around, went down to Sussex or something like that to explore, or have you done that in the past?
Asking for a friend, says Brady.
Yeah, I know. I was like, booking a flight.
So yeah, I do. I try and do one once a month where I visit as many different producers as I can. If you go onto my Instagram, you'll see a little map that I did. Was it last month? No, June, July. It must have been August. I think I did it in, and I did 5 different wineries and 1 hotel, and I always post about it and say this is what I'm doing. Anybody who wants to join me, they're more than welcome to tag along. So I like to keep up with the Joneses in terms of networking. I think that's a really big thing that everybody should be doing. So we always visit down south, or I always connect on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm in your area. This is who I am. Can I come and taste some of your wine? And they'll say yes or no. But a lot of the networking that we have in the UK, where it's you meet with, let's say for argument's sake, it'll be a winery show, and then if you're bold enough to go to each table and say, "What do you do? Where are you? Can I come and visit?" 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes. So I've got business cards to the max, and it's just a case of going around of picking out which one you can when you get time to go down.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a lot of my questions. My main thing is what I personally want to know is what you're excited about in 2023 in terms of wines, wine styles, regions that might be emerging or becoming more available. What are you just looking forward to in the new year, wine wise?
In terms of regions, I think some of the lesser known wine regions are taking a big foothold at the moment. And it tends to be what a lot more people are asking for is, I feel like Greece is a big thing at the moment. There's a great variety called the Sritiko, which tends to grow. It can grow all over the place. Comes from Mykonos, Santorini. It comes from just outside of Athens as well. So if you think of where Athens is, it is quite volcanic, quite hilly, a lot of mountains. And there's a lot of ones that go slope off down towards the ocean. So you do get a lot of salinity from it. But the mouthfeel from a Sritiko, especially if it's got 1 or 2 bottles age on it, is just delicious. They're really, really gorgeous to drink at the moment. I think the Croatian wines, Macedonian wines, Balkan wines seem to be a big thing. But one of the surprising ones is Sicilian wines, believe it or not.
Right.
There's one of them that is called a Grillo, which is native to Sicily. There's a couple of producers, Tressa Secca, I think is the producer. They do a sparkling Grillo, a still Grillo, and they're just knocking it out of the park at the moment. So for me, they have a little bit more of a grip and a little bit more mouthfeel because it tends to be a little bit more ripe than the mainland. But Sicily itself, it has its completely different, unique soil, if you will, and volcanic. The soil content is a lot different than it is to the mainland for whatever reason. But Grillo seems to be pulling off really, really well. The other one I had was that was a Puglia, which was Sangiovese, obviously not from Chianti, Montepulciano, wasn't anything like that. But because it's more south, it just tasted a little different. It had a little bit more warmth going on.
Right.
So I think if you look at the main wine regions of all over Italy, Spain, mainland Europe or Eastern Europe, and look at the lesser known varietals that do come out of there and just have a little bit more of exploration, you're going to find those the reds or the whites that you may not necessarily have heard of, but becoming quite popular quite quickly.
I like that. Yeah, especially because I feel like some of my Somm friends are big on Etna Biancos or Etna Rosso. Like Carrot Conte is getting a lot of the shine. Catturato kind of is as well, but nobody really talks about like the Grillos of the world. So I think that's a great point. Anything else that you have on the follow up with that? I know Brady's a big Stirtico fan, so he's probably just nodding along.
Yeah, I got to be in Santorini earlier this year, and I was blown away because I maybe had one Stirtico, and I can't recall if it was mainland or out on the islands, and I was blown away by the quality out on the island in Santorini. And even some of their blending grapes, a Theory, one of their blending grapes that they use out there, and some of their Stirtico, I had that as a varietal 100% bottling of that, and it was really incredible. I was like, wow, even like you said, some of the grapes that are not front and center on the label from those regions are really interesting to have. Yeah,
it's nice to see that. There's a lot of I'm a big fan of having these blended wines. Obviously, Bordeaux's super famous for it in terms of that, and a lot of people are using other grapes for blending. We're one of them as a country, as a producer. But I'm a big fan of one of the things I did when I first started out in the terms of wine is try and get 100% of whatever that grape variety was, and then you can truly understand that as a tasting. So tasting 100% Assyrtiko or tasting 100% Cab Franc or, whatever else that, springs to mind is if you can get 100% of that grape variety, it does give you a firm understanding of what that grape variety tastes in its entirety rather than as a blended grape. So here's my ultimatum, so to speak, is try and find that single varietal bottle that will truly express that grape variety, and maybe that will, you'll start to appreciate if you have 100% Assyrtiko, what 100% Assyrtiko is like, rather than that slightly blended one.
Yeah.
Just for argument's sake, so to speak.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot. I think that a lot of your recommendations resonate with us and in line with a lot of what Billy and I talk about often. And it's good to have our listeners be able to hear some stuff, some perspective about wine regions that they might not have had on their radar. So, and I think your job is really awesome. Billy and I were talking about it's like an aspirational end of the wine business game to be able to.
But and which is great, and thank you very much. But it's like there's so much more out there. I mean, I don't know everything. I don't know. For argument's sake, you brought up Austria, and I don't drink a lot of Austria. Obviously, I drink a couple of the Rieslings and whatnot, but I tend to drink a Mosel Riesling. That's just my favorite region. But it's wine is my argument would be if you're in a room and you talking about wine and and if you're, I wouldn't say be the smartest person in the room, so to speak, but once everybody's spoken, then you can understand what everybody else is thinking. So for me, a wine is forever and always engaging, forever learning. Even Master Soms, they're still learning new stuff on an MS, MW, and whatever coin you want to use. Wine is always so self-explorational that only you can truly be the holder of the key by trying all these new different things and just keep learning. And the next bottle you open, but we all have those favorite wines that we always go to the supermarket. I'm a firm believer of it. I love an unoaked Tempranillo, quite a young one, because it's fresh, it's fresh, it's bright. No over oakiness on it. That's just my personal opinion. But we always go to the supermarket and go, oh, I love that bottle of Bordeaux, or I love that bottle of, whatever. Is instead of going, and I say this to all my clients, instead of going to the supermarket and picking up the same thing that you always buy, take 3 steps to the left and buy that one, and just put your hand in the shelf, pick it up, because you're never going to know what that bottle tastes like or what you're going to like or dislike if you don't try more. So open up every single bottle, taste as much as you can, and just sit along and go for the ride, because it's one hell of a journey.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Wayne. I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for coming on today. Billy, you have anything
You're more
else?
than welcome, guys.
No, that's a perfect way to end it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was our interview with Wayne Baxendale. I hope everyone had a good new year, and we're excited to keep going with the Vint podcast in 2023. Share with your friends, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circulars amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.